His wife joined him at his new job in the canyon, and she saw the persons milling around the beanery. She thought the place an asylum.
The beanery or Tiger Hotel had lots of food and good food, and the miners were kept there. The single men lived there, and the company subsidized the beanery to keep employees.
They had over 800 men there, and hell, they fed those people awful well, and they could put anything they wanted in their lunch buckets and everything. You couldn't do that today. You'd be losing too much money. There was a lot of turnover in those days, and the reason they were so good to them on their food was because they wanted to keep them happy and that they wouldn't leave.
We had no water in our house. It was, I had to go out and put my foot through the spring at the end of the little sidewalk to get water to do the laundry. You had to go out over the creek to go to the bathroom. It was really, when I think back, I don't know how I did it, but I was 17. You don't.
Sugar houses or outhouses were built so they perched out over the creek. The sewage, combined with garbage and mine wastes, gave the creek its ignominious title, Little Nasty.
I was a scoutmaster, and once I had to fish a kid out of the creek. He rolled in with his bicycle, and I says, "Gee, are you hurt?" He says, "No, now I'm a citizen in Burke because I fell in Little Nasty."
We didn't have garbage service like we do nowadays, so I get my vegetables peeled and all, and I put them in the dish pan, with water, the peelings, and then you'd run across the track and throw the dish pan full of with this stuff into the creek, and 9 times out of 10 I'd let the dish pan and all go. So we were buying lots of dish pans in those days.
Today, Canyon Creek, which flows through the gorge, glistening in the fall light, beautiful, looks tame, but hardly the center of attention it used to be. During floods, the water rushed down Gorge Gulch. It met Canyon Creek and brought with it rocks which filled basements. The rocks and water toppled buildings in Burke's litany of natural disasters.
We're here on the old Burke Road prior to 1926, 7 along in there. And at that time, the Warner Brothers were producing a picture by the name of Frivolous Sal, which starred Mae Bush and Pat O'Brien. And when I was about 9 years old, Mae Bush came around this point riding on a horse, and across the canyon she was watching what I believe was a boyfriend of hers in the picture being thrown from a mining company tramway. And I can remember so vividly under this big rock where her producer or director of the film was telling her to cry, and she couldn't cry, and he said, "You've got to cry." And she said, "I can't cry." And all at once he called somebody up there, and they put something in her arm with a needle, and I'll never forget this. And a few minutes later, she was hysterical and crying.
For daily excitement and high drama on the Burke Road, there was Guy Galeri running his stage line, Larry's Cannonball.
I remember a particular one cold winter night driving up to Burke from Wallace and up through the area called Mace by the old Mace schoolhouse, and there was just two ruts in the road. And I got in those ruts, and here comes Larry's Cannonball barreling down the street, and I had an awful time getting out of those ruts to dodge into a driveway there to get out of his road. He had quite a reputation for being a wild driver.
Was that called Galeri's Cannonball?
Well, that was just...
Is there a song on that?
No. yeah, the Jim Vermillion and some of them, Wallace made up a song, Bill Benson.
Could we hear it?
Oh, no.
Yes,
no,
come on.
Not from me, no.
From the banks of the Coeur d'Alene River to the mighty Glidden shores, from the downtown streets of Wallace up to Otto Olson's stores.
Come on.
I can't sing a lick. Oh. Well, let's see, I'd have to get started right with me.
There's a bus of majestic splendor, she's known quite well by all.
Oh.
She's the modern accommodation called Galeri's Cannonball.
Great cities of importance, it meets upon the way. There's Woodland Park and Gemtown and Frisco, by the way. Black Bear and Yellow Dog and Burke above them all can be reached by no other than Galeri's Cannonball. Listen to the rattle, the rumble, and the roar as she wanders up the woodland by the Canyon Creek's wild shore. Hear the mighty rush of the engine, hear the drunken muckers call. They're all going up the canyon to Galeri's Cannonball.
First, it was just the NP, and they had freight and ore train, and a coach on the back. That was a passenger coach. And came to Wallace early in the morning, and then you didn't get back till late at night. They'd take 2 loads of ore a day out of Burke. So the day's ore all went on the NP train, and the Heckler ore all went on the Union Pacific.
Well, they used to go so slow up the canyon, and a lot of these people that burnt coal, couldn't afford to buy coal, so they jump on the coal car and throw it off along the tracks and pick it up later on.
When the trains departing from the Wallace Depot came to Burke, storekeepers rolled up their awnings. The brakeman jumped off the train to move any automobiles that were parked on the tracks. Cooperative owners would even leave the keys in the ignition. At the first rumble of the train, the customers at Vix Amedia's pool hall spread their hands over the pool table to keep the balls from dancing out of place. The train was so much a part of the life of the town that it was reported that baby buggies were adapted to roll on the train tracks.
Well, this is a picture of the train, an ore train going to Wallace on the NP track, and the boiler blew up, and it blew the whole half a section of the train out, and it just happened in a very good spot where there was absolutely no houses. And if it had gone about 100 feet further, it would have hit the school, and there was a whole bunch of kids in school. But it blew the boiler right off the train to the side of the road, and the fireman was killed because he was putting coal in the firebox, and whether there was no water in the boiler or not, they don't know. But when they got to Wallace, it didn't cause any fire, but when they got to Wallace, they took the train from the roundhouse at the NP and brought it over to Union Pacific and repaired it all before there could be any inspection. So if there was any fault of the company that would sue the railroad company, why, it was all covered up.
Those railroad tracks are gone where trains once traveled daily the canyon from Wallace to Burke and back. But the path of their memories, this old rail bed, still exists.
It was called the Saturday Night Special, and we would get on the train and go to Wallace and go to the show.
One coach was relegated for the guys who were a little bit off. And the ones who were a little unconscious or wanted to fight, they just threw them in the baggage car and hauled them up to Burke.
As we got on the train, a lot of the teenagers would go through the car, get on the back of the train, walk through the car, and J.J. Brill, the ticket taker, seen them get on. So he was ready for them. And as he went through the car, the boys weren't in the car so he could pick up their fares. They would jump off and get on the back of the train, back of the car. And so he missed getting their tickets.
On one occasion, Al Hutton, a train engineer and part owner of the Hercules mine in Burke, was heading down the canyon when 22-month-old Mae Dunphy got out of her yard and, spotting an object, wandered out onto the railroad tracks. Hutton blew the train's whistle feverishly, but the grade prevented him from bringing the train to a stop. People ran to help.
But by that time, the cowcatcher hit her, the front of the train, and it knocked her in between the ties. And the only thing, she wasn't hurt, only that when she raised her head as she saw light, why, the couplings on the ore cars hit her in the head and bashed the back of her head in. And her chin was bent up to her ear, and she was her head looked like a pulp. And my mother was standing there, and she fainted when she saw that head, and they just bundled the two of them in the caboose of the car and took them down to the Wallace Hospital.
Incredibly, over time during the long winter months, her mother and grandmother massaged her face back into place again. So miraculous were the hands of love and luck and faith that in later years, so the story goes, no one could tell her face ever had been disfigured.
No, I wasn't aware of it at all until Mother told me the story. She just looked normal to all of us, but when she went to the dentist, he said he x-rayed her because she needed some new teeth made, and he said, well, what happened to you? Were you run over by a train? And she said, yeah. So he was, he couldn't believe it either, but that's what had happened. The conductor on the train gave her a violin, and sadly, she never learned to play, but it's still in the family someplace.
As a teenager, Mae had left the gift violin on the couch, and Anne, her sister, sat on it by accident and broke it. Their dad took the violin to an old prospector, who fixed it for them, but instead of returning it, he kept it. When the prospector died, they found the violin next to his body. He had apparently been playing it when he died. What was winter like in Burke?
Winter, oh boy, winter was, we had snow up there you wouldn't believe. I remember one night it snowed 4 feet. The time I went to bed and when I got up in the morning, I waited 4 feet of snow coming down. Nobody got from from Wallace to Burke to go to work that day until noon. But it started early. You see, we were almost 5,000 feet high. It's 4760, I think, the elevation that Burke is, which is 1,000 feet higher than Wallace. And that made a difference in the amount of snow you got by quite a bit. And sometimes the snow would be 8 or 10 feet deep.
Oh, I can remember the snow getting very deep up in Burke. In my folks' front yard, of course, with being shoveled and the snowfall, we would stand on top of the snow pile as the train went by, not 3 feet or 2.5 feet maybe from their gate. The engineer would hand us candy right out the train when they'd stopped there, and they unloaded their freight right there at the little depot.
To clear the snow, the trains were fitted with snow plows, which pushed the snow to the side, but the canyon was too narrow. Soon, there was no place to pile the snow.
And so they actually had teams of men that would work shoveling snow onto the flat cars. and then the flat cars would take the snow down the canyon to some unpopulated area where it was easy to shovel the snow back off the flat cars into some area that was not going to be used for anything else. And then if they needed another trip back up to the Burke main downtown area to remove the snow, they would pick right up where they left off and continue that until the snow was completely removed.
Burke not only suffered damage from heavy snows, but snowslides. Dozens of canyon residents have been killed over the years in massive, terrifying slides.
I had gone back to bed and I heard this big whish. And I didn't know what it was. And then I heard the train had stopped in front of my house and it was whistling. They had tied down their whistle. So when I got up and went out, my windows were solid with mud and little pieces of branches and leaves and all that.
The pile of snow was 20, 25, 30 feet high. Covered the road, the railroad tracks, and the stream bed.
So I went running out in my robe, and all the neighbors were out, and the engineer said to get all the men out with shovels because a car had been caught in this snowslide.
I come down in a hurry, and Dr. Maury's car, front end of his car, was buried in the upper part of the slide. Mother was buried in the lower part of the slide. My mother was in 2 snow slides, the first one being in February of 1910. This snow slide came off of Churchill, and it took out the west side of the living quarters to the boarding house, and she was buried in a room in there for a period of time. Just exactly how long, I don't know.
Ann Dunphy, later Ann Magnuson, escaped from the 1910 slide unharmed, but a young boy up Church Hill was not so lucky.
Jimmy Rogers, his father ran a restaurant here in Wallace, and he lived up on the hill in back of us, and the only one that they didn't get off of the Church Hill was old Mr. Richshot, and he went up to get him down. But as he was going up the steps, so the slide came down, and he was in the slide. My mother and the doctor kept him just in hot packs trying to thaw him out because he was under the snow so long he was frozen. And then they said, well, then his father got up there by then, and he wanted to take him right to the hospital in Wallace. So they took him, and they had to carry him over the slide to get him on the train. By the time they got him to Wallace, he died on the steps of the Wallace Hospital. My mother always contended if they'd left him alone in the house, she could have thawed him out and brought him to.
Hearn Park was carved out of the canyon just above Burke.
And back in 1937, this is where I first started playing ball. Matter of fact, I'm standing on the home plate right now. In them days, the grandstand was back here, and it would be filled to capacity. The bleachers over in there were full. The bleachers down here were full. Matter of fact, they'd had to walk 3 or 4 miles to get here. We'd start out in the afternoon, and the women would leave early. They'd come here, and they'd go out here in these fields, and they'd pick